This conference will now be recorded.
Stop.
This conference will now be recorded.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay. In the last class, we have seen about gastritis and peptic ulcers. What are the two types where we find the peptic ulcer, and what is the most common site?
First part of
Duodenum.
duodenum.
First part of the duodenum. Very good. Okay. And apart from that, where it is most common in the stomach? Hello.
In
Hello?
antrum incisura.
Usually along the lesser curve and the incisura. Okay. So we have learned about what are the symptomatology and what is the presentation and what are the different tests and what is the most common location and what is the pathology of these ulcers in the last class. And we have done something about the medical management. So we are providing the patient with some anti-secretory agent, let it be H2 receptor antagonists or PPIs, and the main aim, because most of the thing is going beyond this H. pylori. So eradication of the H. pylori is one of the main thing we have to adequate in case of medical management. Okay. Then in this class, we are going to learn something about the surgical management of the duodenal ulcer, right? So, we find duodenal ulcer most commonly in the first part of the duodenum. So H. pylori is one of the most common cause, but usually in normal duodenum, H. pylori does not harbor. But if there is a gastric metaplasia, as I told you in the last class, it can harbor H. pylori and can provoke its effect. Okay. Then what are the different surgical options available for duodenal ulceration? The main aim of treatment of this duodenal of surgical management is mainly dependent upon two features. We have to decrease the effect of the gastric acid from the duodenum. So we can achieve that by doing two procedures. Either we can decrease the secretory potential or secretions of the HCl from the stomach, or we can do a diversion. So without getting damaged, without getting duodenum damaged, we can divert the food or the chyme from entering into the duodenum. Okay, so we are doing a bypass procedure, that is we are diverting the acid from the duodenum. Okay, so our principal aim is mainly focused on two things. One is to decrease the secretory potential of the stomach, and the other option is we are going to divert the acid exposure of the duodenum by doing some bypass procedure. Okay, so whatever procedure you choose, okay, either Billroth 2, gastrojejunostomy, vagotomies, or any procedure will have its own morbidities, mortalities, and post-operative side effects. Okay, so we have to mainly plan. We have to, so eradication is better than cure, or prevention is better than cure. So initial management is more focused rather than going to any complication. Okay, so what is meant by Billroth 2 gastrectomy? Do anybody have idea what is this Billroth 1 and Billroth 2 gastrectomy?
Billroth 1 distal gastrectomy and gastroduodenostomy.
Yes, Billroth 1 is we will do a distal gastrectomy. This is mainly Billroth 1 is for gastric ulcers, where you find ulcers in the lesser curvature and in the distal part of the stomach. There you will do a Billroth 1 gastrectomy, wherein you will resect the distal part of the stomach and you will perform a gastroduodenal anastomosis. So you are doing a resection here. There is advantage of performing a resection in case of gastric ulcers, because why? Because we have to prove every time a gastric ulcer not to be malignant. So there is a high chance of gastric ulcer turning to be malignant. So sometimes resection of this ulcer can be beneficial. Okay. Then what is this Billroth 2 gastrectomy? What is Billroth 2? Billroth 1 is gastric resection and gastroduodenal anastomosis. Okay. Then what is this? Billroth 2.
Sleeve gastrectomy and gastrojejunostomy.
Okay. Sleeve. Okay. It may. So there need not be any gastric resection here. Directly, you can do a bypass of the duodenal segment, and you can have a anastomosis of the stomach with the jejunum. Okay. It is
Loop
somewhat
of jejunum.
loop of jejunum, that is gastrojejunostomy. Okay. So but here what you are doing, you are providing the duodenum as a separate stump. So you have to make sure that the afferent limb is so small as possible. Okay. So even after these procedures, there can be so many side effects or problems regarding this procedure, because the
Dumping
most
syndrome.
dumping and all, but most common is there can be the you will close the duodenal stump, right? So post operatively there can be chance of duodenal stump blowout. Most complication is duodenal stump blowout. Sometimes there can be leak from the gastrojejunostomy site, but when compared to duodenal stump blowout, this is least common. This happens only when, because stomach is richly vascularized, so there is a less chance that the stomach if the stomach is devascularized, only there is a chance of getting gastrojejunal leak, which is less common when compared to duodenal stump. And what is the third one is recurrence at the stoma. So we have opened this stomach at one side, so that opening site also there can be recurrence of the ulcer. Why? Because you have done only diversion. You have not done anything which is decreasing the production of the acid. So again there can be resurge of the acid production, which can lead to the formation of ulcer at the stomal site. Okay. So even after Billroth 2 gastrectomy, there can be what are the disadvantages, or what can happen after Billroth 2 is, one is you can have a duodenal stump blowout, the other you can have a gastrojejunostomy site leak, which is very less common. This can occur secondary to vascular compromise, and the other one is recurrence at the stomal site, because you have not done any of the vagotomies there. There can be chance of recurrence of the ulcer at the stomal site. Okay. Then coming to the gastrojejunostomy. So gastrojejunostomy is somewhat useful, but it is having its own hazards also, because you have done a GJ. So what happens? All the alkali content from the small bowel is coming into the stomach. So it what is this doing? It is decreasing the exposure of the duodenum to the, so you have not separated anything, just you have brought a loop of jejunum and you have done a anastomosis to the dependent part of the stomach. Okay. So you have not done any resection. There is no duodenal stump here, anything. So what can happen? The alkali content from the small bowel can enter into the stomach, and this can decrease the acid exposure of the duodenum. But at the same time, remember, the vice versa, the acid from the stomach can also get directly damaged to the jejunal mucosa, leading to the formation of stomal ulcer, right? So this is also having its own complications, so it is also quite ineffective, right? Then the third one is, so is it clear? You can understand what I'm saying, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes,
Then,
ma'am.
then the third one is truncal vagotomy and drainage. Trunk. Remember, trunk in the sense the main trunk of the vagus, that is the right vagus or left vagus or anterior and the posterior vagus, main trunk, you are dividing. So you are denervating the entire stomach there. Okay. You are denervating the entire stomach. So what is happening at a later stage? So the acid secretion is going to stop, but the receptive relaxation of the stomach is lost, or the relaxation of the stomach is lost. So what is, there will be some stasis. Okay. And so you have to perform a drainage procedure. The drainage procedure can be an aneuploidy, or you can do a pyloroplasty, or you can do a GJ, gastrojejunostomy. Okay. So by sectioning or dividing the trunk of the vagus, you are reducing the maximal acid output by 50% in this individuals. So as the vagus nerve it is motor to the stomach, you are completely denervating the antrum and the pyloric part of the stomach, which is leading to stasis. So you have to provide a drainage procedure that can be a pyloroplasty or a gastrojejunostomy. Okay, this is quite safer when compared to gastrectomy. Okay, so what is pyloroplasty? What is pyloroplasty? I will show you in the next slides. So this is what is pyloroplasty, given after the person Henrik Mikulitz pyloroplasty. So what are you doing is you are opening or doing a otomy in the stomach longitudinally. In this way you are opening the stomach and you are closing it transversely. You are sectioning the stomach longitudinally and closing it and closing it transversely. This is Henrik Mikulitz pyloroplasty. Okay.
Ma'am, it is opposite to sphincteroplasty.
Okay. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is about truncal vagotomy and drainage. Okay. Then coming to high selective vagotomy. In high selective vagotomy, what are you doing? You are only
Seromuscular branches.
Only the parietal cell mass. The parietal cell mass is only getting denervated. Okay. So you are saving all the main part. You are even remaining part of the branches you are saving. So it is quite better when compared to truncal vagotomy, but it should require highly expertise. Okay, even with the highly selective vagotomy, there is loss of receptive relaxation of the stomach, and so the patient may complain of epigastric fullness and early satiety. So highly selective vagotomy also is having its own. But when compared to truncal vagotomy, in the hands of an expertise, highly selective vagotomy. So this highly selective vagotomy does not need any drainage procedure, because you are not denervating. You are denervating only the parietal cell mass. You are not disrupting any the antrum or the pyloric part. Okay, so this is better when compared to truncal vagotomy. But usually in our setup, when a patient comes with gastric outlet obstruction, remember, we usually perform a truncal vagotomy and gastric outlet obstruction. What are the main causes of gastric outlet obstruction?
Ulcer.
Most common cause is ulcer.
Pyloric stenosis.
Pyloric stenosis. But actually, this is not a true pyloric stenosis. Okay. That because the ulcer is lying in the first part of the duodenum. The most common cause is duodenal ulcer, and the second most common is gastric cancer. Because now we are treating the ulcers earlier with medical management. Now the trend of duodenal ulcer is decreasing, and the obstruction secondary to, I will tell you in the later slides, gastric cancer is increasing. Then coming to truncal vagotomy and aneuploidy. So what are you doing here? You are removing the gastric remnant and joining it to the, you will do a truncal vagotomy and remove the gastric remnant, and you will resect the antrum, and you will join the remaining part of the proximal part of the stomach to the duodenum. So what is the advantage here is you are removing the source of gastrin here. So gastrin in turn will go and stimulate the production of HCl. So that source has been decreased. Okay, so these are the different setups or different procedures what we usually advocate, and from olden times, what are the different procedures have come put forward for the treatment of duodenal ulcer. Is it clear? So in this picture, I'll show you. See, this is the vagus nerve. Okay, so if this is the anterior vagus, you have just you are trying to ligate and you are going to separate it. This is the anterior vagus. Now it is pulled laterally, and you can observe the posterior vagus now. So and now this is also being cut, like ligated and cut. In all these surgeries, what you will do, you will resect a bit of the vagus nerve and you will send for histopathology to confirm post-operatively that what you have taken is confirmedly a nerve. A nerve, is it a nerve bit or some muscle fiber or something you have taken it out? So each and every time when you do a vagotomy, you send the specimen for for histopathological examination to make sure that it is the vagus nerve that you have ligated or resected. Okay. Now coming to treatment of gastric ulcer. So gastric ulcer mainly for the ulcers on the C. This is Billroth 1 gastrectomy. So what you have done, you have resected the ulcer here. Billroth 1 is you have resected the ulcer present on the lesser curve or the distal stomach. You have closed the defect over the lesser curve, and you have made a size of the stomach some equivalent to the size of the duodenum, and you have done a anastomosis, that is gastroduodenostomy. This is for treatment of gastric ulcers. This is Billroth 1 gastrectomy. Okay, this is mainly for the ulcers located in the lesser curve and the distal part of the stomach. For Billroth 2, sorry, for proximal ulcers, what you are going to do? So you are going to perform a Billroth 2 gastrectomies. Okay, so what you are going to do, you will resect the specimen and you will keep a duodenal stump and bring a part of the jejunum and directly anastomose with the jejunum. Okay, this is about Billroth 2. And this slide I have already told about the drainage procedure pyloroplasty. You will section the pylorus longitudinally and you will suture it transversely. Okay. Then these are the different procedures of gastric ulcer or peptic ulcer management. Now coming to the, so for, as like any surgery, sorry. As like any surgery, this gastric resections or your truncal vagotomies or any vagotomy will have its own complications. Okay, first is coming to, so 30% of the patients undergone surgery for the gastric ulcer or peptic ulceration can have some sort of complications following surgery, out of which 5% will have intractable symptoms, right? So first one is recurrent ulceration. So even after the procedure or even after your surgery, patient can have recurrence of the ulcers. Okay, so as like normal ulcer, these also initially can be treated with your anti-secretory agents. Okay, remember, so recurrent ulceration following surgery initially can be managed with medical management, right? So like normal initial ulcers, these recurrent ulcers can also have its own complications. What are the usual complications? Either it can perforate, either it can bleed, or it can lead to pyloric, or it can lead to stenosis because of the fibrosis post ulceration. Okay, so these are the two aspects, and one most important thing we have to remember is, which is a rare complication after recurrent ulceration, is formation of the gastrojejunocolic fistula. So you have done a gastrojejunectomy. This can communicate with the, or it can penetrate into the transverse colon and can form a gastrojejunal colic fistula. Okay, so this anastomotic ulcer, they penetrate the transverse colon, which is very nearby, and can form a ulcer. Okay, so and can form a fistula. Okay, so what are the usual presentation is, Patient will have severe diarrhea after every meal, and sometimes patient can vomit foul feces. Okay, and even they have foul breath. Okay, and because of the contamination of the jejunum with the colonic bacteria, there will be nutritional disturbances, and patient can land up with weight loss and dehydration, because of which we may mistake this case to be a malignancy, because patient is having dehydration, patient is having weight loss. So usually we think post, because there is a high chance that these ulcers can turn malignant also. So we may think that this to be a malignancy. So we can identify with the help of a CT contrast. So before doing any surgery, or when the patient is malnourished, or we will correct the malnutrition, and we will plan for a revisional surgery for this gastrojejunocolic fistula. So did you understand? One is recurrent ulceration. This recurrent ulceration is one of the easiest complication to treat, mainly with the help of our PPIs or H2 antagonists. It can also have complications like other ulcers. So it can also perforate, it can also bleed, or it can also stenose. But one major concern is there is a chance of formation of fistula to the transverse colon. So in such cases, patient, because of the contamination with the colonic bacteria, there is a chance of weight loss and malnutrition, because and patient will present with foul, massive diarrhea following every meal, and patient can sometimes vomit formed feces. So in all these conditions, you have to recognize this with the help of a CT scan, correct the nutritional disorders, and plan for a revisional surgery, right? Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Am I fast, or is it okay? Very boring to hear all these online classes. I think most of the people are not hearing, right? Yes,
Hearing, ma'am.
hearing, ma'am. Okay. Then the next one is small stomach syndrome. So small stomach in the sense, after performing gastrectomy, the size of the stomach decreases. So um, there will be early satiety. The stomach will lose all its relaxations. Okay, the receptive, adaptive relaxations all are lost, and patient will have early satiety. So this, most of the time, this will settle with time. Okay, then coming bile vomitings. Okay, this is most commonly seen after gastrectomies or after vagotomies. Okay, after eating, so patient will complain of vomiting of a simple bile or food mixed with bile. Okay, and so patient will complain of pain immediately after taking food, and there will be bile reflex. Okay, then if these are if this is not controlled, so we can try a bile chelating agents, but this is not promising for us. If they also settle down with time, but if it is not controlled, okay, if it is not controlled or intractable, we have to do a revision surgery, mostly because of gastrojejunostomy and all. There will be reflex. Okay, the duodenal stump so what is better in these cases, we can do a Roux-en-Y diversion. What is this Roux-en-Y diversion? Any idea regarding? I think I have to show it on the picture, which I'm not having now, but definitely I'll get it to you in my next slide. So what you're doing in Roux-en-Y is, so in Billroth 2, what are you doing? You are resecting the stomach. Okay, then so you are closing the duodenal stump. You are dividing the stomach, one point at the stomach level and other point in the some part in the jejunum level or duodenum level. Okay, below the duodenum. So after resection, you will bring that proximal part and anastomose with the stomach. And now the second end, so I'll get you in the picture, you can better understand. So the distal part of the duodenal stump is brought down and it is anastomosed later at a later stage in the jejunum. So what is the advantage is you're getting all the bile content coming in the duodenum at a later stage. So with this you are avoiding the bile reflex. From for sure I'll get the diagram in the next picture. So just remember Roux-en-Y diversion, or you can see in your books, you can appreciate the picture. Okay, so this is different from Billroth 2. So Billroth 2 is later modified into Roux-en-Y diversion. Okay. So the next one is dumping syndrome. So dumping syndrome, see, complication of gastric surgeries can be asked as a question for you, and dumping syndrome separately can be asked again as a question to you. So coming to this dumping syndrome. So both you have two type of dumpings. One is early dumping, the other is late dumping. Okay, so both are having different etiology. The cause for both of them is not the same, but they have a common feature. Common feature is that there will be, because there will be early gastric emptying. So what is this early dumping and what is this late dumping? So in early dumping, there will be abdominal, and this is seen in 10% of the population. This occurs there will be abdominal and vasomotor symptoms. This occurs due to the, so what happens, you have taken food, okay, this enters the stomach, and directly from the stomach the food is entering into the intestine. So because of the high osmotic load in the intestine, it leads to accumulation of fluid or sequestration of the fluid from the circulation and into the normal into the GI tract. So which results in decreased circulatory volume. Okay, leading to this vasomotor symptoms. Did you get me? Because of the high osmotic load in the stomach contents, which is emptying into the small bowel, there will be shift of fluid or sequestration. When there is a sequestration of the fluid from the circulation into GI tract, there will be decreased circulatory volume, leading to production of your vasomotor symptoms. So how does the patient complain, or what are the symptoms? Patient complains of epigastric fullness, sweating. So sweating, lightheadedness, tachycardia, these are all vasomotor symptoms. Okay, patients may have colic and sometimes diarrhea. These are all the symptoms in case of early dumping. So patient have the symptoms immediately after meals. Remember, early dumping is immediately after meals and lasts for around 30 to 40 minutes. So if you take more of carbohydrate diet, okay, you have, it is aggravated with food intake, mainly carbohydrates, and it gets relieved after taking rest. Okay, so what do you generally advise is, ask the patient to take small quantities of meals at frequent intervals of time, preferably fat and protein diet, and you avoid carbohydrate diet. Okay, and see, if it is not getting treated with these treatment, you can also try octreotide. Okay, but this octreotide use of this octreotide can lead to formation of gallstones. Even if it is intractable, then only you rarely plan for a revision surgery, that is Roux-en-Y diversion. Okay, so what is this early dumping? Because of the high osmotic load in the stomach content, which is dumping, or which is kind of moving into the intestine, there is sequestration of the fluid from circulation of the GI tract, leading to decreased circulatory volume. So patient will have all these vasomotor symptoms, which is occurring immediately after meals and lasts for around 30 to 40 minutes, and mainly it relieves with taking rest and aggravates mainly with carbohydrate diet. So what do you prefer, or what do you ask the patient to do? You ask the patient to take frequent meals in small quantities, preferably fat and protein. Okay. Okay, shall I go to next one? Then is late dumping. So late dumping is seen in 5% of the population, is nothing but reactive hypoglycemia. So what is happening here? So after you take a meal, okay, So the carbohydrate content in the meal increases the plasma glucose. Okay, so in turn, with increase in the plasma glucose, the insulin levels will also, there will be reactive hyperglycemia. So to contract it, the insulin levels also will increase, leading to secondary hypoglycemia. So it is reactive hypoglycemia. So this is seen second hour after meals, which lasts for about 30 to 40 minutes, same like your early dumping. It relieves after taking food, because patient is having hypoglycemia. When you take some food, the symptoms get relieved. Okay, and it is aggravating with exercise. And what are the, how does the patient come to us? Patient complains of tremors and giddiness, faintness. These are all the complaints what the patient tell us. Okay, this is about late this is about late dumping. So early dumping, everything about vasomotor symptoms and abdominal complaint, and late dumping is about reactive hypoglycemia. Okay, so here also we are the same. We'll ask same like early dumping. We'll ask the patient to take frequent fat and protein rich diet, and octreotide, which decreases the secretions. Is it clear? Okay, shall I
Yes,
proceed to
ma'am.
the next complication? Okay. So our next complication is post-vagotomy diarrhea. Okay. So this is one of the worst symptom or worst complication we can address. So patient, most of the patients complain of loose bowels or loose stools following surgery, and 5% may have intractable symptoms. All this, the exact cause is not known, but we can attribute it to the rapid gastric emptying. Okay, and it is very difficult to treat also. Okay, same like dumping syndrome, we can advise the patient to have small frequent meals, but octreotide is not at all helpful in treatment of post-vagotomy diarrhea. Okay, rather anti-diarrheals may be of some use. Okay, this is one of the most devastating one. Okay, so the exact cause is not known. Here also treatment we will plan according like dumping syndrome, but here octreotide is not useful. Then coming to gallstones. Why does this gallstones occur? So in vagotomies, what you are doing? You are denervating the vagus nerve, which is supplying the GI tract and the gallbladder. So what happens now? The gallbladder is denervated. So there will be no contraction and relaxation. Everything is lost. There will be stasis of bile inside the gallbladder, which leads to formation of gallstones. But not every case of gallstones you have to plan for surgery. Only symptomatic cases you will plan for surgery. Okay, then coming your nutritional disturbances. What is the most common nutritional disturbances you will see following
Iron
gastrectomy? Anemias. So either it can be iron deficiency anemia. One is because there is reduced absorption of iron, and the other one is because of gastric ulcers and bleeding. There will be loss of blood from the gastric ulcers or gastric mucosa. Okay, so iron deficiency anemia because of reduced absorption or blood loss, and B12 pernicious anemia, or because of loss of intrinsic factor, or sometimes this destruction of the B12 by the colonic bacteria. So then can lead to anemia. Anemia and weight loss are the most common nutritional disturbances we see following gastrectomies or surgeries after peptic ulcer. Then coming to malignant transformation. Okay, so gastric ulcers has more tendency or more potential to transfer into malignancies, right? So it is, they are usually having 4% high tendency than normal population to transform into malignancy. But the time lag between transforming of this ulcer or post surgery, it takes around 10 years. So what could be the most common causes is, one is you have done a jejunostomy, GJ. So there can be bile reflex. Bile reflex leading to bile reflex is gastritis is one option, and the second one is intestinal metaplasia. These both can be explained for the formation of malignancy post gastrectomies, okay, which usually takes around 10 years, which is almost 4% as high than general population. So these are some of the complications of following gastric surgeries. So one is ulcer, recurrent ulceration, okay. The other one is small stomach syndrome, then reflex of bile leading to bile vomitings, then you're dumping early and late, then diarrhea, post-vagotomy diarrhea, because of the stasis of bile can lead to gallstones, and because of gastrectomy and loss of the iron absorption and the intrinsic factor can present as anemia and weight loss, and the last one is malignant transformation, okay. So these are the complications of surgery. Then now now we have now coming Percy to the complications of peptic ulcer. What if you have left the ulcer as it is, if you have not treated in time, then what are the consequences an ulcer can turn into? So either it can perforate or bleed, or it can produce pyloric stenosis, okay. Coming to the first one is perforate. So I think in this class we can complete 5 minutes or 6 minutes more. So one is perforated peptic ulcer. So this one will be kept as an X-ray in your exams. So see, this is the first picture showing X-ray of the. So this is lateral decubitus and this is X-ray erect abdomen. So not fully covered here. So you can visualize. So this is the diaphragm. This is the diaphragm here. This is the fundic gas shadow. So this is a crescent shaped shadow in the right under the right dome of the diaphragm. So this is nothing but air. So this air, what does it do? In standing position, it comes and it tries to settle in the dependent position. So because diaphragm is resisting between the racks and the abdomen, it comes and settle here. So air under both domes of the diaphragm, or air under right dome of the diaphragm, a crescent shaped shadow which signifies air under right dome of the diaphragm, is the diagnostic feature of hollow viscous perforation. Here, what is the hollow viscous? It can be a duodenum, it can be a stomach, okay. Remember, understand, okay. So
Yes, ma'am.
perforated. So what are the which ulcers usually perforate? Anterior ulcer, duodenal anterior ulcer
Duodenum.
perforates, posterior ulcer bleeds, okay. But in case of stomach, usually what happens if the ulcer perforate, usually the contents escape into the lesser sac and you can't find much of the peritonitis. So in such cases, you may mislead the diagnosis, okay. Usually in older times, we usually see this in the middle-aged people, but now we can come across this perforation in elderly people also. Previously, males used to predominate the females, but now because of the increased use of NSAIDs for all your arthralgias and whatever causes, because of the increased use of NSAIDs and your painkillers, this tendency is more towards increasing in females also, okay. Then how does the patient come to us in the casualty? So patient will have severe abdominal pain, sudden onset of severe abdominal pain, and when you inquire about the history, patient will complain of the long standing history of ulcer or gastritis, for which he is on PPIs or some H2 antagonists, okay. Initially there won't be any fever, but there will be severe abdominal pain. Why? Because the gastric contents which is expelling out through the perforation will come and irritate the peritoneum. The peritoneum gets irritated because of the gastric contents, and patient will have severe abdominal pain, and which later initially even though the gastric contents have less bacterial contamination, but as time goes on, bacterial peritonitis sets in, which leads to, so patient will have tachycardia. Initially there won't be fever, but later on fever also sets in. If it is not corrected in time, patient can present with features of shock, okay. So how do you So what are the classical features when you examine the patient? So these are all history. And what are the classical features when you examine the patient? So patient on examining the abdomen, patient will have cardboard like rigidity. Okay, patient will have cardboard like rigidity, and all the quadrants there will be distension of the abdomen. Patient will not move, all the quadrants of the abdomen will not move equally with respiration. So where does this collection go and collect? Either below the diaphragm or in the right iliac fossa. So there will be restricted movement of the abdomen with respiration, and because of the severe pain, patient will not is very unlikely to move its position. Patient will be very restless. Okay, so there will be cardboard like rigidity. Okay, patient will have tachycardia. In later stages, patient may land up in hypotension. Okay, all the quadrants are not moving equally with respiration. Then you will do a you will elicit liver dullness. Usually the liver dullness is elicited in which space? Yes, liver dullness. So you start percussion in the right aspect of right aspect. So there will be liver dullness in the fifth intercostal space. Hello, hello.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Usually, liver dullness is palpated in the felt in the fifth intercostal space, because but in this case, when there is a perforated peptic ulcer or anything, and when there is a perforation of hollow viscus, what happens? The air comes and occupy the right dome of the diaphragm, because of which the liver is pushed down, and there will be shifting of the liver dullness. So liver dullness is shifted beyond the fifth intercostal space. Even in fifth intercostal space, you can hear that normal resonant sound as like upper four intercostal spaces. Okay, there is shifting of liver dullness. And on now, if you ask for an x-ray, you can appreciate the nice clear crescent shaped shadow. If the patient is very sick and patient is not able to stand, you can ask for a left lateral decubitus film, in which case you can appreciate the air like this. Okay, this is a picture showing left lateral decubitus. Okay, then you will do a routine investigations. We will ask for a serum amylase. Serum amylase is usually elevated in case of acute pancreatitis. But remember, this is not sensitive, because even in perforated peptic ulcers also, serum amylase can be elevated. Okay, and CT scan is highly accurate in diagnosing this perforation. And what is this DPL? Still, if you have any suspicion, you can plan for a diagnostic
Diagnostic peritoneal lavage.
okay, you can do a diagnostic laparoscopy, or you can, some surgeons have the habit of placing a needle in the right iliac fossa and aspirate the material. So looking at the aspirate, you can tell whether it is a duodenal content or it is a ileal, but it is generally not a good practice, because immediately after you place a needle, the air under diaphragm will be, because the air escapes out, you can't appreciate the air under diaphragm sometimes. Okay, so what is time? Okay, we will stop with this perforation. So what we have to do, the patient may be in nutritional imbalance, sorry, electrolyte imbalance. So you have to provide resuscitate the patient, provide adequate analgesia, because after patient gets relief of pain, we can clearly elicit all the signs what we can see in a case of perforation, rather the patient when the patient is suffering from pain. Then most of the time we have to plan for a laparotomy. So exploratory laparotomy, identify the site. So immediately after you open the abdomen, you can see the color of the peritoneal fluid. By looking at the peritoneal fluid, you can say whether this is a duodenal perforation in the duodenum, or in the small bowel, or in the large bowel. Okay, so what you'll do, usually the duodenal perforation will be in the first part of the duodenum. Isolate the perforation, and you do a primary repair. Okay, you take the sutures transversely away from the defect and close it with the help of a omental patch. Okay, that is you keep the, so you tie the sutures not too tight, because there can be chance of cut through and place an omental patch. Even while placing omental patch also, don't make the sutures too tight because there can be compromise of the vasculature to the omentum. Okay, so this is called as modified Graham's procedure for duodenal ulceration. That is nothing but placing an omental patch and closing the perforations is called as modified Graham's procedure. And if it is a very large perforation where it is very difficult for you to take a bite and close it primarily, then you can plan for a Billroth 2 gastrectomy. Okay, then this is only a temporary procedure. This is not a permanent procedure because you are only closing the defect. But later on, after surgery, again patient can present with perforation. For this, now previously they used to do a truncal vagotomy to decrease the acid output. But now, because of the high advent of our anti-secretory agents, they will put the patient on anti-secretory agents first with the H. pylori eradication therapy, followed by anti-secretory agents. Okay, so immediately after surgery, you have to keep the stomach empty. Okay, so so you will keep a nasogastric tube and let all the secretions out through the nasogastric tube, and keep the patient with H. pylori for a period of how many days? H. pylori eradication kit?
14 days.
Yes, 14 days. And it
14
includes,
days.
what does H. pylori eradication kit constitutes? Two
Two
antibiotics
PPI,
and PPI.
two antibiotics and PPI.
PPI. So 14 days HPA eradication kit followed by your anti-secretory agents. And always don't forget to follow up the patient. Okay, post surgery also you have to follow up the patient because there can be a chance of recurrence. So always, if the patient is continuously seeking the help of NSAIDs, you have to keep the patient continuously lifelong on PPIs. Okay, this is about perforation. Okay, shall we continue in the next class or continue? It's already 4. Then we are left behind bleeding. One is we have done with perforation. Then other two options are, one is bleeding, the other one is stenosis, pyloric stenosis. Okay, shall we continue? No.
Next class.
Next class. Okay, next class we will do with the bleeding and what are, other than peptic ulcer, what are the different causes of upper GI bleed, then about gastric outlet obstruction. Okay, then if it is finished in time, we will close it, or we will start with CA stomach. Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
ma'am.
No. Okay. Is it clear up till now, or any doubts? Yes.
Ma'am,
Shall we?
how
Shall we
will the
start?
post get?
Yes. I didn't get you. Hello.
Ma'am, in
Yes.
gastrojejunostomy, how will the jejunum go into the stomach, ma'am?
Sorry, I didn't get you. In gastrojejunostomy. Yes. After that.
How will the jejunal contents will go into the stomach? Retrograde.
There can be chance of the jejunal contents back reflex into the stomach, or not into the stomach, at least to the stoma site. Stoma site in the sense, the opening of the stomach in the jejunum, there can be reflex of the contents, no? So there can be contamination of the stomal site, and there can be chance of recurrence of ulcer over the stomal site. Not exactly into the stomach.
The gastric contents will be at high pressure.
The gastric contents will be
At high pressure.
the gastric contents, you are right, but during lying down, or because it is in a isoperistaltic, you will do it in a isoperistaltic movement, so there can be chance of the jejunal contents reflex or going and damaging the stomal site. In such cases, there can be chance of recurrence of the ulcer at the stomal site.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, then we'll see in the next class. Next class Friday 10:30 to 11:30. Okay, all next month complete 4 classes. 10:30 to 11:30, all 5 days, right? Okay then.
Okay.
Bye.